All right, pop quiz. It's an easy one, but still, pop quiz. Which state has the lowest smoking rate in the nation? Now, I'm not going to make this multiple choice because, as I said, it's kind of an easy one. Utah, right? Duh. The Mormon Church says you can't smoke. Lots of Mormons live in Utah, and so Utah has the lowest smoking rate in the nation. That's not that hard to figure out. Here's a harder question. Which state has the second lowest smoking rate in the nation? It is not a state that is Mormon-dominated. The answer is the great state of California. And since California has such a huge population, it's the most populous state in the nation, it's kind of a good thing for the whole country that California has such a low smoking rate. I mean, fewer people smoking means fewer people getting sick from smoking. It means less human tragedy associated with that. It means lower medical bills for everybody. It is a good thing. Well, yesterday, Californians voted on whether or not to raise taxes on cigarettes in their state. Even though California, in practical terms, is really anti-smoking, the tax on a pack of cigarettes in California is low compared to the rest of the country. It's less than 90 cents a pack in California. The national average is more like $1.50 a pack. So this ballot initiative yesterday would up the cigarette tax in this very, very anti-smoking state. And the proceeds from the new tax would go to cancer research. They think it would raise $750 million every year. And the money wouldn't just go to the general fund or to the legislature or to some politician you think you don't like. It would go to cancer research. So if you hate cancer, and who doesn't hate cancer? Californians yesterday had the opportunity to vote on something that would hate cancer in a really useful way. You'd make it so that fewer people would get cancer in the first place because fewer people would be smoking cigarettes if cigarettes were more expensive. And you could also help cure cancer by funding a lot of research into it. And also, for the record, statistically speaking, if you were a California voter who was voting on this thing yesterday, you probably don't smoke anyway. And neither does anybody you know, except sometimes when they're drunk, but we don't need to admit that before last call. I mean, California understandably loved this idea of this new tax on cigarettes in their state. And, you know, frankly, California voters loved this idea the last time they were asked about it, too. Part of the reason the California cigarette tax is so low is that voters haven't been asked about it since 1998. The last time they raised that tax was 14 years ago in the state. But it was a voter referendum back then, too. And the people of California went with it. They chose to add 50 cents to the cigarette tax back in 1998. That's how we got the tax rate that the cigarettes are at now in the state. This time around, even fewer Californians are smoking. And when they first started polling on this subject this year, when they first started polling on the I Hate Cancer bill, people in California loved it even more than they loved the idea back in 1998. The idea of a new $1-a-pack cigarette tax was winning by more than a 2-to-1 margin in the state. 67% of people in California saying they were in favor of this new cigarette tax. That is a slam dunk. The poll was released by the Public Policy Institute of California in March of this year. March of this year is not that long ago. March is a number of weeks ago that is small enough that you do not have to take off your shoes in order to count that number of weeks. It was in March that Californians were for the new cigarette tax at a rate of 67%. But also in March, the tobacco companies started their ad campaign against the tax. And boy, howdy did they start it. You know, we talk about big numbers, or at least big sounding numbers in policy and in politics all the time. But let me put it this way. You think the right spent a lot of money on the Scott Walker recall yesterday? I mean, they broke every state record, right? That was off the charts, post-Citizens United, special loophole, unlimited spending, tens of millions of dollars spent in that Wisconsin race as the whole country looked on in amazement at the amount of money that was flowing to Scott Walker. Well, the tobacco companies in California had a war chest that was bigger than the whole Scott Walker deal. You want to know where the most money was spent in politics yesterday? Bigger than Wisconsin was just one side of this one ballot initiative in this one state. Tobacco companies ponied up close to $50 million to fight the cigarette tax ballot initiative in California. And hey, wouldn't you know it, it worked. Before the ad campaign, remember, in March, 67% of Californians were going to vote for the cigarette tax. What happened last night? 50-50 split. In terms of the preliminary numbers that they've got out so far, it looks like the tobacco companies have won. The other side is not conceding yet. They want all the absentee ballots counted and everything, and it is very close, but it is roughly a tie. And the cigarette tax may have lost, even though it was at 67% popularity just a couple of months ago. So that was $50 million well spent, right? I mean, $50 million well spent dollars can make I hate cancer a losing idea. $50 million well spent dollars could make apple pie and loving mom a losing idea. Large numbers in politics eventually just all sound like large numbers. We lose the ability to even compare them, let alone to understand them fully. But unlimited corporate money in politics now means that any issue, any candidate, any state from here on out can be a race like this now. So you can have the American Cancer Society and the American Lung Association and the American Heart Association and the California Medical Association. You can have celebrity cancer survivor endorsers like Lance Armstrong and celebrity political endorsers like Michael Bloomberg. You can have all of the experts. You can have all of the great and good and philanthropic and high profile and saintly on your side. You can have everybody who knows the issue on your side. You can have 2/3 of the public on your side before anybody has done anything other than just explain the basics of what's going to be on the ballot. But even on an issue this popular, this incontestable, all it takes is unlimited corporate money on the other side, and everything else is outweighed. We talk about big numbers all the time, but qualitatively, that's how it goes now. That's what it's like now. That's where we are at. I am in Washington tonight, which is why the backdrop looks different. Studio looks a little different than it usually does. Last night, though, I was in our home studio in New York City. And when I am sitting in my usual seat at my usual desk in New York, we have what we call an RP, a rear projector. That's the visual thing that's up over my left shoulder. So on your right, it's our not-so-magic wall in the studio. And that's where we put whatever the visual is for what's going on in that segment. This is how we opened our show last night as the polls were closing in Wisconsin. This is how we started our coverage of what was expected to be the very close recall election in Wisconsin. Turnout, turnout, turnout. Because the exit polls showed that the Wisconsin race was expected to be super-duper close, everybody's expectation was that the Democratic side had made it close by turnout efforts, by get-out-the-vote efforts, by on-the-ground organizing. Yeah, Scott Walker had a huge financial advantage, and with that financial advantage, he had owned the airwaves in the state, blanketed the state with paid advertising that was paid for by his corporate billionaire donors. But if it was close, as everybody who subscribed to those exit polls, all the networks believed it was going to be, if it was close, it must be because Democrats had a ground game going on. Democrats may not have had the money, but they had the people power, and therefore, if they could hit a home run in terms of turnout, then the Democrats could win. That must have been what made it as close as it looked in the exit polls, and that must be the way that Democrats could win it. And on the Democratic side, it worked. I mean, in the sense that they did get very, very high turnout. And also, it did not matter. I mean, yes, axiomatically speaking, even higher turnout would have worked to the Democrats' advantage, obviously. But you know what? The Democratic side got spectacularly high turnout in Wisconsin, and it was not enough. It was not enough to make up that huge chasm between the candidates created by the differential in money. What had Scott Walker done with all that money that he had? Ads. He ran ads. He ran paid TV advertising, starting as far back as Christmas. Democrats, meanwhile, knew they couldn't compete on those grounds. They knew they'd never have that much money, so they were counting on their ground game to kick in at election time, much later on. They did turn out their voters at election time, but look at this. If you look at one exit poll at all, look at this one. Look at when people decided who they were going to vote for. This is nuts, right? 86% of people say they decided which way they were going to vote months ago, when it was wall-to-wall paid Scott Walker ads on TV, and that's it. Wall-to-wall paid Scott Walker ads, which were things that he was able to buy because he had a lot more money. Not in every election, but in just about every election. If you are outspent 8-1, then you are going to lose. I mean, there's occasionally going to be a Hail Mary, miracle underdog, how inspiring. But over time, structurally speaking, remove the personality and just talk about this in political science terms. If you are outspent that kind of way, if you're outspent the way that Republicans can outspend Democrats now with unlimited corporate money, the Democrats are going to lose structurally almost all the time. Today, I interviewed the Democratic House leader, Nancy Pelosi, former Speaker of the House. It was an event marking her 25 years in Congress. And we talked about what happened in Wisconsin last night. And I asked her how Democrats are planning to deal with that. Listen to her response. You have consistently talked about public financing for elections and how important that is. You've championed the Disclose Act, for example.
So have you.
Yeah, I've ranted about it. I guess that's different. You've spoken, I've ranted. But one of the things that I think is so important about what's happened in Wisconsin, not just last night, but what gave rise to the recall in the first place, was the fact that the Wisconsin Republicans under Scott Walker were using public policy to essentially dismantle public sector unions. And Democrats do not have a way to compete in terms of big outside money in elections. And that is the reality now in Wisconsin. It is the reality in states where they have essentially eliminated union rights. And it looks like Republicans, particularly after last night's results, will be emboldened to pursue that in as many states as they can. I think structurally that's a pretty dire electoral situation for Democrats. And I'm wondering if there is a secret Democratic plan B that I don't know about. Something to bridge the distance between now and the hoped-for days of public financing for elections, which I don't know when that's going to happen.
You mean apart from Rachel Maddow?
Yeah. If I'm the plan, that's a bad plan. That was just her initial response? If the plan is what? Luckily, I am not their only plan. In fact, I am not their plan at all. Nancy Pelosi, as you heard me mention at the top of the question there, she is a proponent of publicly financed elections. She has been forever. But she does, in fact, lay out what she sees as the plan that Democrats need to follow in order to get out of this structural mess they are now in which structurally, over time, in a way that is not attributable to any one candidate or any one race, they are at a almost critically crippling disadvantage. Here's her plan.
We are in a situation where there is endless. This is not about, well, should we put money here, endless money that does not have to make a decision about one race or another. So you have endless money just with misrepresentation suffocating the system. You have voter suppression by some of the same people who were elected in 2010 at the state levels and the rest, suppressing the vote. 20 states have initiatives that are in place or on the way to suppress the vote. And you have poison the debate, the dialogue. Suffocate the system, suppress the vote, poison the debate. So what does an average person say? A pox on both your houses, I don't even know what you're talking about, and they turn off to it. And that is a victory for the special interest. It's a victory for the special interest. We might as well just go to those people and say, who do you want to be president? Who do you want to be speaker? Who do you want to be governors in our states? Because there's no way to contend with that much money. So we have to disclose. That's really important. Disclose, win, reform, and then overturn the amend the Constitution to overturn the Citizens United decision. We have to do that now.
Disclose, win, reform, and then amend the Constitution. I mean, win is obviously a short-term goal. Constitutional amendment to get around Citizens United, that is a very, very, very long-term goal. Do Democrats have a realistic way to survive in elections, even in the short term, to even try to get to the medium term, let alone that long term, if Republicans are essentially systematically defunding the Democratic Party in a way that renders Democrats incapable of competing? A Democratic senator who is now facing one of the largest onslaughts of unlimited corporate cash in the country, if not the largest, is our guest next.